Okay. So I'm very excited to welcome Ehud back to CSAR, which is ironic because I'm in the Poconos and he's in LA and no one's actually at CSAR. Although Mason appears to be, it is an illusion. Um, yeah, that's just a fake background. Ehud, Rabbi Ahud Sela, has a degree in, was born and raised in New Haven, Connecticut. And he moved to California for college. He has his bachelor's in biochemistry from UC Santa Barbara. Then eventually came back to, and that's where he met his wife, Alicia. And then he came back and was ordained at JTS. And along the way also received a master's degree from Penn in bioethics. He is the father of 3 kids. And soon after graduating from JTS, went back out. He was a Wexner Fellow. He went back out to LA, where he served as a rabbi at Sinai Temple under Rabbi David Wolpe for, I think, 3 years. 3 years. It was a bunch of years. And then became the head rabbi of Temple Ramat Zion in Northridge after that, where he's been the rabbi for now 10 years. Ehud is also, I mentioned he's a former Riverdalian. He went to CSAR for 2 years while he was at JTS and lived nearby. But the reason, my personal connection to him is from before that. Ehud and I went on Nativ together, USY's college leadership program, and we're basically best friends and roommates from the very beginning of the year. And I was the best man at his wedding. He signed the ketubah at my wedding. And our families have been very, very close friends for all these years. So, you should definitely buy his book. You should buy 2 copies of his book because that's how many I have. And you should especially read it and look for the it's 2 references to me, right? I'm in the book twice. That's the best part. So without any further ado, I'll turn it over to Ehud, who's really a very thoughtful and inspiring book for anyone who's thinking about illness, about death, and about why bad things happen in the world. But I'll let Ehud kind of describe it, and then hopefully we'll have a good conversation. Take it away, Ehud.
Thank you, Yoni. Appreciate the beautiful introduction. Yoni and I met when we had just graduated high school, heading to Nativ in like a breakout room in an airport hotel. And within about 5 minutes, we recognized that we said we're cut from the same cloth, or you said that, and been pretty much running sort of parallel lives for almost every time since then in the past 25 years. And it was special for me to get to be extra close to the Schwabs when we lived for those couple of years in Riverdale, and we were at CSAI. So last year I published my first and only book, which I'm talking to you from like inside my book. I love the virtual backgrounds. So it's called Seeing Angels in the Shadow of Death, a Rabbi's Journey Through Illness and Health. I started writing it a long time ago, just as a way for me personally to deal with the things that had happened in my life. And then slowly I recognized that these stories might have reverberations for other people. But then also as a rabbi, so much of the stories, and as I was remembering them, so much of them were infused with the Jewish teachings that either I learned at that time or that I later reflected on as I was thinking back to those particular memories. So what I want to do is take you through the book, or just a couple of parts of it, but I want to pause every once in a while and give you just a little bit of a text study, because I am a rabbi. The first draft I wrote of it was story, text study, and a bunch of rabbis who have written books who I asked to proof it said, that's not really the best way to write a memoir. Infuse your stories with the text, but don't make it like a treatise. But I'm going to do that a little bit more today because we're in a group and I want to kind of be a little bit more rabbinic and not just be a storyteller tonight. So the crux of my story begins in high school, where I went to a small private secular high school, kind of a traditional New England high school, which was founded in 1660, one of the oldest schools in the country. And I was my first introduction outside of my Jewish day school to non-Jews and to the non-Jewish world, really. And I was slowly making my way through. There was a young woman who I became friendly with, but not really close with, who was in a couple of my classes. In the middle of our freshman year, she became sick with cancer. And it affected our class, but not terribly that much. Again, I wasn't really close with her. I had maybe 1 or 2 classes with her. She was certainly a standout in terms of who she was. She was bright. She was a star athlete. She was attractive. She kind of had the golden girl qualities that you might expect of someone typical like that. Her name was Ersi Belcher, definitely Goyish. And I use that in the most wonderful sense of the word. Her mother's an Episcopalian priest. So I didn't think too much about what it meant for a classmate of mine to have cancer. She would be in and out of school for the next few months. Same thing for sophomore year. She was in and out of school. They would make announcements periodically about what was going on. Then at about the spring, maybe April or so of spring of sophomore year, they made an announcement that Erisi was back in the hospital and that it would probably be a good thing if people wanted to visit her now. Being 16, it didn't really click for me what that meant in terms of how serious her condition was. But it did resonate for me all of a sudden that said, all right, maybe it's time to kind of step up and do something. Because I knew as a good Jewish boy, there's a mitzvah, Bikur Cholim, you're supposed to do that. So I decided to go and visit her. So I'm going to pause for a second. We'll do a little bit of text study. I'm going to see if I can share my screen. If that's going to work. So I'm not sure if you have these texts. Can you all see that? You see that okay? Yeah? Thumbs up? Okay. So it's a text you might be familiar with. I didn't know this text at the time. I learned it later, but it resonated for me certainly later in thinking back and reflecting on this particular time. So it says, Rabbi Abba, son of Rabbi Chanina, said, he who visits the sick takes away 1/60th of his illness or pain. Said they to him, if so, let 60 people visit him and restore him to health. All right, so Rabbi Abba has this great teaching, go and visit the sick. You're going to help them get over their illness. And he gives this ratio. And then they all say, oh, maybe you're being so specific. So it's not just a ratio, it's a cure. Send 60 people and you're gonna cure them. He recognizes he's speaking metaphorically. So he says, he replied, the 60th is as the 10th spoken in the school of Rabbi Yehuda the Prince, and providing further that he, the visitor, is of his affinity, meaning constellation or age. So let me explain what he's saying there. He's saying, okay, if you want to take me literally, that it takes away 1/60th. What I mean is 1/60th in this other context, meaning, and if you continue reading, you see what he says, each person takes away 1/60th of the remainder. So you can never fully cure the person. It's a Zeno's paradox. It's not 1/60th of the total amount initially, it's 1/60th of the remainder after each person has taken away a 60th. So it never fully goes away. So he's saying, if you want to take me literally, you can read it that way. But I'm speaking really metaphorically. And providing further, he says, is the visitor of his affinity. And I think he means there, maybe in context, constellation or age, but that you have some connection. I don't know how many of you have ever seen these kind of funny videos of how not to do Bikur Cholim. There's definitely ways not to do Bikur Cholim. You have to have a connection with someone. You can't just walk in and say to someone, oh, you're sick? Hope you feel better. Bye. Like, that doesn't really work in terms of, maybe technically you fulfilled the mitzvah, but you haven't really made a difference. So there's something kind of integral in Bikur Cholim about making an actual connection. But I also like what he's saying in terms of the fact that if you make a connection with the person that you're visiting, it makes an actual difference. I remember learning at the seminary that when they said, well, what's this big deal with the rabbis in this ratio of 1/60th? Usually we understand it in terms of kashrut, is that 1/60th is the way that the rabbis would say the smallest amount that I can measure that's still real, so to speak, that's still an actual thing. So he's saying, when you visit someone, maybe I know that visiting someone doesn't take away their fever, their cancer, their heart disease, but it makes a difference. How much? The smallest measurable difference I can tell you. But it makes even just that little bit, so it's worth it to allow the person to, sorry, I'm thinking at the waiting room. It's worth it to go visit the person because you're making a difference. Stop sharing. So I went to go visit Erisi in the hospital. It was a Saturday. I wasn't so religious back then. My father drove me. I went to go visit her. I met her parents in the lobby, in the waiting room. I wasn't able to go see her. They said she wasn't feeling well that day. So I went to go just chat with her parents. And that was fine. But I knew that to visit, you actually have to visit, not just chat with the person's parents. So I left. The next Saturday rolled around. I asked my father again, can you drive me? He said, sure. So they drove. Again, I encountered her parents in the waiting room. They said she's really not up for it. But since you've come again, and this is your second time, why don't you write her a note, and we'll pass it along to her, and that'll be a way of visiting. So I wrote her a note, and they said, why don't you wait here? They went in to bring me to her. I won't tell you what's in the note because you have to buy the book to read it to see what's in the note. She was intubated at the time, so she couldn't talk, but she had a pad that she could write with. And she wrote on it, tell him to come back tomorrow and I'll see him. So her parents came out and said, whatever you wrote to her, she wants to see you. She's just not feeling up to it today. So go, come back tomorrow. And no matter what, she'll, even if it's just for a minute, she'll see you tomorrow. So I said, okay. So I left. It didn't sink in so much for me that I should go back the next day. I kind of futzed around on Sunday and didn't really manage my time. And in the afternoon, I think my dad or mom said, so do you want us to drive you and take you back to hospital? And I said, no, I'll go next week. I'm got homework to do or this or whatever. So they said, okay. Got to school on Monday, walk into homeroom, and the teacher's face is ashen. And she has us all sit down and calm down. And she tells us that Erisi died yesterday. And I just lost it. And I felt tremendous guilt. I know it's egotistical, I know, to think I had to go be there. She was waiting for me to visit. And I had said I'd do it. And she was waiting, and I didn't show up. And she said, I'm done fighting, and she died. And I carried this guilt for years. It stuck in my head for many, many years. I started saying Kaddish for her when I was in shul because I felt tremendous guilt. Her close friends, her parents, she has a twin brother. They kept doing things memorializing her at the school that we were at. I couldn't kind of participate with them. I felt bad about it. I felt guilty. But she was there with me. I think for all of my classmates, she was there in my head. Freshman year, I was with Yoni in Israel on Nativ, and I had thought about Erisi when I was there. I remember going on a hike and seeing a stone and thinking, I'm going to bring this stone back, I'm going to put it on her grave. I'd also thought before I left, I want to talk to her parents. I hadn't really talked to her parents since that day in the hospital. I hadn't really, again, participated in the memorials at the school. I felt kind of on the outs. Although I had been at her funeral. So I brought her parents' phone number with me. And I thought, okay, I want to call them on her yard site. I mean, she's not Jewish, but on her English anniversary. And so I had her parents' phone number. And I tried to calculate, okay, so if I want to catch them, this is May 16th, I want to catch them. So I'm 7 hours ahead. So I'm going to catch them maybe at night at their house. So I'll get up in the middle of the night. So I got up in the middle of the night on the 17th, actually, in the morning. So it's like 3 a.m. in Israel. So it's 8 p.m. in Connecticut. And I call, and I actually reach them. And I talk to her mother, the Reverend Sandy, for a couple of minutes. To be honest, I don't even really remember what we spoke about. But we talked, and I told her about what I was doing in Israel and how I wanted to pass on my condolences. And she was very touched, and she said, when you return, and I told her about the stone, she said, when you return, give me a call and we can go to the cemetery together. So about 6 weeks later, I'm back in the States, and I call her up, drive up to her house, and we go to the cemetery and show her the stone and explain the custom. And we talk, and she says, Ehud, I want to tell you a story. So she said that the day of Erisi's death, her her yard site. I'm not sure what word she uses for it, but on her yard site, she says, of course, it's always difficult, and we've had memorial services. She said, this year in particular, I was nervous about it because the first 2 years, all of Arcee's friends were still in school. And so they were all still around. They were able to kind of be all together. This was going to be the first year when they weren't. Everybody was off at college. So we weren't sure. It was going to be smaller. So she said, I was praying to God to give me a sign that there was going to still be a connection with Arcee. And I was disappointed. And she said she was talking to her priest, who, every rabbi has a rabbi, hopefully every priest has a priest. So she was talking to her priest and saying, her faith, maybe not shaken, but wavering, disappointed, her prayers for a sign from God not answered, feeling really sad about her daughter's death and not sure where to go from here. Her priest is going through her day with her and her prayers and asks her, was there anything redeeming about that day? Was there anything good in the memorial? And she said, she said there was one strange thing that happened that day. She said one of Arcee's classmates, not a close one that was kind of more tangential, one that she hadn't really stayed in touch with, did call at the end of the day to pass his condolences and say he was thinking about her. And interestingly, yes, he's away at college, but he went to college for his freshman year in Israel, and he was calling from Jerusalem, and it was the middle of the night for him, and he made that effort to do that. And that was really nice and unexpected. And so her priest says to her, hold on, Sandy. So you're telling me you're praying to God for a sign to show that your connection to Arcee isn't slipping. And then out of the blue, you get a call from a friend of hers, not a close friend, more like an acquaintance, who's calling from Jerusalem, the holiest city in the world. And he calls to say he still feels a connection to her. And you don't think that's a sign? So she said, of course, when he put it that way, she felt much better about it. And so she's saying this, and I'm crying, and she's crying. But what it did for me was it made me think about, why did I want to do that? When I was in Connecticut with them, I didn't make the effort. But for some reason, it occurred to me to do it in Israel. And it occurred to me months earlier to make sure to bring her phone number with me in September. This is before we had cell phones and things, like to write her name for a phone number in my address book so that I would have it in May to call her, and thinking about, okay, to do this, and then to bother to do it. I don't know what compelled me. I didn't have an answer at the moment of what compelled me to do that. So I want to pause and show you another text. I'm sure you're all familiar with the Joseph story in the Bible, in Genesis. There's the one very strange little scene where Yaakov has sent Yosef to go check on his brothers, and he doesn't find them right away, and he encounters a person who gives him directions. So this is from Genesis 37. Yaakov said to Yosef, go and see how your brothers are and how the flocks are faring, and bring them back word. So he sent him from the valley of Hebron. When he reached Shechem, a man came upon him wandering in the fields. The man asked him, what are you looking for? He answered, I'm looking for my brothers. Can you tell me where they're pasturing? And then he directs them where they're going. Not really critical to the story. It could have just said Yosef went to look for them there. He didn't find them. He kept going, and he found them in this other place. Okay. Does it really have to say he stopped for directions? I mean, when you tell a story about a travel plans, I don't know, maybe you'd like to say every place you stop for directions for GPS, but it's not so critical. Except, of course, the traditional interpretation is this is not an ordinary man. I'm just giving you the Rashi here. Rashi says this was the angel Gabriel, because it says Ha'ish in Genesis, and it says Ha'ish in the book of Daniel. And the Ish in the Daniel was the angel Gabriel. There's a bunch of other Mefarshim. If you don't trust that, if you think it's just Rashi, it's not. He's quoting Midrash Tanhuma. It's from Rashi. All the rabbis throughout the Middle Ages, they all say it's an angel. And they all point out also, it says, not just that Yosef ran into the angel, but the man found Yosef. Like, the man was on a mission. to go find Yosef to make sure that he found his brothers, because if he didn't find his brothers, didn't get sold into slavery in Egypt, what happens to the rest of Jewish history? Who knows? So then I started at this time, or actually kind of a little bit later, reading up about this idea of angels and how do we understand them in Jewish tradition? How do we think about angels? Are they just the kind of things with flappy wings? Or there's this whole tradition in rabbinic literature and in the Midrash that God takes over people and kind of deputizes them as angels and sends them off to do a mission. I think it's Rabbi Lawrence Kushner, he writes about it in one of his books. He says, everybody has this job once in their life, maybe more. And I think about it oftentimes in the language of Mordechai Kaplan's theology, where he talks about God as the force for righteousness in the world. He talks about, think about it metaphorically, he said, like gravity acts on you like a force. Yeah, okay, I'm a good person, a decent human being. But again, I don't know what compelled me to make that phone call at that moment. It was kind of out of character. But it felt like I had to do it. It was something I felt absolutely compelled to do. I go off to college. College is wonderful. As you heard, I went to UC Santa Barbara, one of the most beautiful places on earth. Met a nice young woman who eventually agreed to marry me. The middle of my senior year, though, I feel a lump in my neck. And it doesn't go away, and in fact, it starts getting bigger. I go see a doctor, and the doctor immediately knows what it is. They do a biopsy to confirm, but it's cancer. So within a couple of days, I'm whisked back to Connecticut. Yoni, when I called him and let him know, he said, when are you coming back? And so whatever, I told him my flight plans. Again, this is before cell phones and stuff. Whatever happened to my flight, I don't know, but it was delayed by like 3 hours. He waited in the airport. This was like till 2, 3 in the morning with my mom and grandma to pick me up in New York, just to be there. I mean, he didn't drive with me back to Connecticut. He waited in the airport for I don't know how many hours just to see me off the plane, give me a hug and say, you know, I love you and I hope you're going to be okay. And then he went back to college in JTS in Columbia. That's the kind of mensch that Yoni is. So I went back to Connecticut to get treatment, and I didn't have a rabbi who was my rabbi at the time. Well, I had my rabbi in Hillel in college, Rabbi Steve Cohen. My pulpit rabbi from my home congregation, I wasn't so close with because he had joined my senior year, so I hadn't developed a close relationship with him. The previous rabbi had a good relationship with him, but he was often in another congregation. And I reached out to Reverend Sandy, to Eris's mom, because she was a hospital chaplain. So I reached out to her to help me deal with the spiritual and with the emotional issues of cancer treatment and what it all meant. Because I really, even though as a somewhat educated Jew, I really didn't know how to process it theologically. I wasn't ready. I wasn't armed with the text, with the knowledge of how to deal with it. And luckily, again, well, I shouldn't say luckily, blessedly, one of my classmates and friends from Santa Barbara sent me a book called Swimming in the Sea of Talmud, which hopefully some of you are familiar with, co-written by 2 conservative rabbis. Short little snippets of Talmud with a nice little lesson and punchline. So I want to share with you the second one that I read that helped me deal with some of the theology of cancer and illness in general. It's a very famous text. It's from the Babylonian Talmud, page 5b. Rabbi Chia bar Abba fell ill. Rabbi Yochanan came to visit him and said to him, "Is your suffering dear to you?" Rabbi Chia said to him, "Neither the suffering nor its reward." So we have one rabbi getting sick and one rabbi doing what's right, the typical thing. Bikur Cholim, he goes to visit him. Then he does a very strange thing. He's asking him, "Are you enjoying your suffering?" This is a perfect thing to go on what not to do in Bikur Cholim, on those videos that you might have seen. You should never ask someone who's suffering, "Hey, are you enjoying your suffering?" Why would this rabbi do it? Crazy thing. But if you understand the theology and they're both on the same page, then it makes sense. And the theology goes as follows, if you're not familiar with it. In Deuteronomy, it says, God will give you illness as a punishment for sin. But we all know that plenty of people who are without sin get punished with or get illnesses. So how can it be seen as a punishment? So the rabbis had a concept called Yisurin Shel Ahava, which means sufferings of love, which basically kind of works like this. If you are very good, but maybe not perfectly good, God will give you an illness in order to teach you a lesson. It's kind of like, let's say you always get 98% on every test. And the teacher says, this person could get 100. How am I going to get them to get 100? I've told them to work harder. I've asked them. Nothing's worked. They don't push themselves to get those last 2 points. I'm going to give them an F on their next test. That's really going to shake them up. Then they're really going to put the effort in. Then the next test, they'll get 100. That's kind of like what the theology of Yisurin Shel Ahava is. That you could be a righteous person and get an illness as a way to try and teach you a particular lesson, give you some greater reward, either in this lifetime or in Olam Haba, in the world to come. So Rabbi Yochanan saying to Rabbi Chia bar Abba, are you enjoying your suffering? Meaning, I think you're a righteous person. I don't think you're getting this because you did something wrong, necessarily that you're a bad person, but because God loves you so much, he wants you to earn those extra 2 points. God wants you to learn some particular lesson. So are you enjoying the fact that God loves you so much to try and give you a lesson to learn? And Rabbi Chia says to him, neither this suffering nor its reward. Meaning, I accept that that's the theological concept, but I don't like the suffering and I don't want the reward. Which is pretty typical, I think. When you're suffering, at least as Jews, we typically don't say, I like suffering. I mean, I know there's a lot of jokes about Jewish grandmothers, I'll sit in the dark, but most people don't want to suffer. So Rabbi Yochanan says that, of course, the next thing he says is correct and appropriate. He says to him, give me your hand. Rabbi Chia bar Abba gave him his hand, and Rabbi Yochanan raised him up, which we typically understand as he healed him in some way. First of all, I love teaching this just in a pastoral context because it's so important, to have that physical contact. How many people nowadays we can't, hug and kiss people outside of our bubbles? I can't do any hospital visits anymore. When I do funerals, I'm 6 feet away from anybody. It's really hard not to have that physical contact and that comfort. The next part, Rabbi Yochanan fell ill. So the guy who was doing the visiting is now sick himself. Rabbi Hanina came to visit him and said to him, is your suffering dear to you? Rabbi Yochanan said, neither the suffering nor its reward. They have the same conversation. They're all on the same page theologically. Rabbi Hanina says to him, give me your hand. He gave him his hand and Rabbi Hanina raised him up. Same thing. I don't want you to suffer anymore. I'm not saying to you, learn the lesson and suffer through it. No, I'm going to help you. But now the interesting question. The Gemara asks, why did this happen? Couldn't Rabbi Yochanan raise himself? We know Rabbi Yochanan's got the magic touch. He healed Rabbi Chia bar Abba. Why can't he do it for himself? The Gemara answers, a prisoner can't free himself from prison. When you're in it, when you're suffering, even if you can help somebody else who's suffering, you can't necessarily help yourself. You can't free yourself from prison. When I read this, it hit me like a ton of bricks because cancer felt like a prison. I was taken out of my life as a college student. I was forced to live life as a patient, forced in my childhood bedroom, forced to live a life scheduled around, chemo treatments and doctor appointments and blood tests and all these kinds of things. And at first I thought, I'm just going to think of this as a speed bump and I'm just going to ride through it and then get back to school and just not let it affect me. And after I read this, I said, maybe I couldn't let this affect me. Maybe I should start thinking about how this is going to change my perspective on life. So I opened myself up. I talked to different people, and in particular, I started a pastoral relationship with Reverend Sandy. And we would meet every couple of weeks. And we would talk about theology and emotions and things like that. Once I was done with treatment, I was at the tail end. I was going to go back to school. We sat down in the cafeteria of the hospital after I'd had a doctor's appointment. And she said, okay, Ehud, you're going to go back to school now. What does it all mean? What are you going to do with it? And I said to her, I really don't know. I don't think I want to be a scientist anymore. I was majoring in biochemistry, but that's all I planned for. I'm 90% done with my degree in that, and I really don't know. And she said, well, I know you want to be a scientist because you wanted to help people who were sick. You wanted to look for drugs and help research illnesses. After this whole experience, she said, maybe you should be a rabbi. And at first I laughed at her, thinking, no, what do you mean? Like read Torah for people? No, it's like I'm Jewish and I participate in Jewish stuff, but I don't want to be a rabbi like that. And she said to me very calmly, very patiently, she said, hey, like, what do you think we've been doing for 6 months? And that's where the light bulb went off for me. That I reached out to her specifically for pastoring, for theological healing, for emotional healing. And I had been very narrow in my previous views about what healing meant. But I didn't realize that I had reached out for her. So she knew I was Jewish. She wasn't like seeking out to convert me. She knew how much Judaism meant to me. And she's like, this is your path. So she was the one who first inspired me to get to think about becoming a rabbi. I'm realizing it's been about half an hour. Let me do one or two more things, and then we'll do some Q&A. How's that sound? Okay. All right, jumping in. So finished college, went to rabbinical school. My first two children were born, twins, in 2004, about 2 months before I finished 5 years of being in remission from cancer. And my doctor had said that if I can last 5 years in remission, then I don't have to see him anymore. Then statistically, you can never say cured, he said, but statistically, you're not going to get this cancer again if you can go 5 years, because it's an aggressive cancer. So if it doesn't return within that window, you're good. And you don't have to do any more follow-up scans and things like that. So I wanted to mark that day as a big day for me. And so what I chose to do was give a Dvar Torah at the minyan. We went to the Hadar minyan regularly, and also change my name or add a name onto my name. I had read, as part of my reading when I was sick, I had read a lot of things about Judaism and healing, and one of them about the idea about changing your name if you're very sick, so that the Malach HaMavet, the angel of death, won't get you. As if the Malach HaMavet's kind of like a clerk, and if he doesn't have the exact right name, he won't kill that person. So I didn't like that idea that's like, oh, it's all it takes to trick death. We should all be changing our names, all the time. But I did like the idea that changing your name has some effect on changing you. We have that throughout the Bible, that Avram becomes Abraham, Sarai Sarah, Jacob Israel. So that resonated more with me. So I took on two middle names, and I created my own bracha, which was a mashup. I took the Mishaberach for the Cholim for the beginning part, and I took the blessing for changing a name, which you often do when someone is very ill, and I mushed them together for my own prayer on this anniversary, or on this date marking my 5 years being in remission. And so this is what I wrote. I just put the English translation here, but we did it in Hebrew and English. May God, who blessed our ancestors Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, bless Ehud ben Aminadav Irina, whose come for an Aliyah with reverence for God, with respect for the Torah and Shabbat, and in order to change his name. Just as Jacob became Israel when he struggled with the angel and prevailed, Ehud ben Aminadav Irina has prevailed in his struggle against cancer and is now completely healed. Therefore he was someone else, and will be called among Israel Ehud Netanel Chaim ben Aminadav Irina. In the name of all the names, in the name of the angels appointed for healing and relief, may the Holy Blessed One continue to keep him in complete healing and prolong his days and years in pleasantness. May he spend his days in abundant vigor and tranquility, henceforth and forever. Amen. So Netanel Chaim, if you're not familiar with the Hebrew, the two words mean God has given life. I know a lot of people take on the name Chaim when they're ill and they're changing the name. But I also wanted to acknowledge the way that I thought about this whole experience is that not necessarily God giving me life, but a second lease on life, a new way of thinking about it, and trying to learn this lesson of this is a new calling for me. That it's doing what I originally wanted to do, which was help people in terms of dealing with illness and healing, but to do it in a different way. And it really has been a beautiful thing for me ever since. I'll share one last thing, and then I'll stop. So, just in terms of the way things kind of, again, confluences come back. So, my kids, bar bat mitzvah, ended up falling out on May 20th and 21st of 2017. I didn't think about it when we scheduled it. You schedule a couple of years in advance. I didn't really think about what that day meant until we got kind of close to that day. It's in the book. I didn't talk about it tonight, but you'll have to read about it. When I was 33, when I was in my third year out of rabbinical school, I had a bout with something called pericarditis and had to have open heart surgery to clear it. And the day of my surgery was Shavuot in the Hebrew calendar, and in the English calendar was May 20th. So when I'm in shul, the week of August 8th, which is the week that I finished my chemotherapy and radiation, I have an aliyah and I say Birkat HaGomel, which is one of the texts that's also in the study. And then now also on Shavuot I do that. And then I was talking to Reverend Sandy about my kids' B'nai Mitzvah, and she beautifully came out from Connecticut to LA, and I was talking to her about it and making the plans and the dates, and she said, do you know what May 20th is? And I said to her, yeah. I said, it's kind of strange. It's the anniversary of my heart surgery. And she said, oh. She said, I didn't know that. She said, but May 20th is also the anniversary of Eris's funeral. Eris died on May 16th. She was buried on May 20th. Sorry. So she said, Eris, you were with Eris and Eris was with you on that day. And she said, and now I'm going to be with you too. And she came out. Sorry. And so I talked to my kids. It's a special privilege for a dad to speak to their kids on their B'nai Mitzvah. I don't know if, for rabbis, I think it's extra special. So I talked to them about, who they are and who I want them to be and all that stuff. And I said to them, you also gave me a beautiful thing. Because May 20th, while I see Birkat HaGomel on it, or at Shavuot, I still think of it as not like a pleasant day. It's the anniversary of Eris's funeral. It's the anniversary of my heart surgery. I said, but now it's your guys' B'nai Mitzvah. And you made a tikkun for me. You made a fixing. It's a happy day now. And I thought about the verse that we say in Psukei de Zimra. I've been saying it for years, and I never really thought about it. But it's at the very end of Psalm 30. הפכת מספדי למחולי, פיתחת סקיבת האזני שמחה, למען יזמך כבוד ולא ידם, אדוני אלוהי לעולם אודיך. You turned my lament into dancing, you undid my sackcloth and girded me with joy, that my whole being might sing hymns to you endlessly. O Lord my God, I will praise you forever. They really made a tikkun for me. And that's really my message from this whole book, is that I talk in other sections about other people who were close to me who've passed away. We can't escape death. We can't escape illness. It doesn't always seem fair. It doesn't always seem right. The pain doesn't necessarily end. But that doesn't mean we have to be resigned to living lives of despair. We can be angels for one another. If we feel that compulsion, we feel that inner urge to do something, to help someone, relieve some, even if it's 1/60th of their suffering, you have to go out and do it. And if you really are feeling, I feel compelled to go do that, know that that could be God working through you. And you can be an angel, you can be a messenger trying to do what God wants to do through you. I don't know where Rabbi Kushner gets it from, but I don't want to disagree with him, where he says everybody gets that opportunity at least once in their life. And God willing, we get it more. Where we have a very clear moment, we say, this is what I'm called to do in this moment, and I have to go do it. That's my story. There's a lot more details in the book.
Thank you, Ehud, for teaching us, telling your story, obviously talking about things that are very personal. And I would say that not only was Ehud very personal here, but the book is also very personal and equally sweet and touching. I was reflecting as I read the book, and also having been at your children's B'nai Mitzvah, that, you're the rabbi of the shul, so you get to speak at their B'nai Mitzvah because you're giving the sermon, right? So on Friday night, the main B'nai Mitzvah, the main thing going on was Shabbat morning, but on Friday night I was there, and you spoke about this then too. You spoke about the Odyssey. You spoke about kind of the meaning of life, and it seems like that's a real theme of something that you keep chewing over, and so I'm wondering whether, you experienced this cancer at the age of, what, I was 21, 22, and then, had that episode at 33, and, B'nai Mitzvah, and writing the book, and there have been so many opportunities for you to then chew it over. I'm curious kind of what has changed for you in the answers that you have in your head. Have they gotten clearer? Have they gotten fuzzier? What were things that you felt that you had learned when you were 22 that you feel differently about now?
I write about this little vignette in the book, and it was interesting because the rabbi, or he was a rabbinical student at the time, his name is Jeremy Gordon. He's a wonderful rabbi in London. He says, the way you wrote it makes me out to be a jerk. And I said, I hope I didn't write it that way, because it really reflected on me in a positive way. When I entered rabbinical school, I was egotistical. I was like, I'm on a calling. God wants me to be a rabbi. And I love telling my story like I'm on a mission. And Jeremy was very sweet in the sense where he said to me at one time in a discussion, he said, what makes you so good that you deserve God's attention? And that hit me like a ton of bricks. And in the book I talk about Rabbi Simcha Bunam's teaching that every person should have two notes, one in each pocket. One that says, the world was created just for me. And the other one says, I'm dust and ashes. And I go through that dialectic in different times in my life, where I feel like, wow, it seems really clear. I know what I'm supposed to be doing in this moment, and the world seems to be set up for me. And other moments I feel like, am I making a difference? If I disappear tomorrow, would it all mean anything? So I think I was definitely egotistical much earlier in my life, and I'm not so much so now. But I ping pong between the two, and I try and do my work humbly. And when I'm feeling egotistical, I try and be more humble. And if I'm feeling more humble, I try to recognize sometimes, but this is what you're here to do. So don't be so humble that you don't do it.
Sorry, I'm moving so that people can see as it gets darker out here. Would anyone else like to jump in, ask a question, reflect, react? Put something in the chat.
I'll just add one other thing while people are thinking. I try to be very careful also in terms of thinking about that two parts of theology and how do I see myself in all of this. I didn't want to come across, and I hope it doesn't in the book, of saying, Eresi died and I got cancer so I could be a rabbi. Like there's this logical, clear progression. Because I would never say that to someone. I don't believe that, and I would never say that to someone like, oh, if you got sick, oh, this is happening because you need to learn this lesson. This, we just lost someone in our community here, tragically, a teenager in a car accident. I would never go up to their parents and say, because, he died so that there's going to be a reason for it. But we are allowed to make meaning out of it. Because when bad things happen, we're allowed to make meaning out of it. It doesn't lessen it. And I feel comfortable saying that because I've had conversations with Eresi's mom about this and saying, I feel bad talking about Eresi. And she said, no, it's good. First of all, she said, you're perpetuating her memory. And she said, and it's okay. And it's a beautiful thing that's where, that's what started our relationship and that's where we got to. So it's not that Arisi died and I got cancer because I needed to become a ram. But because she died and because I got cancer and because I had this relationship with her mom, I became a ram. And there's a difference there. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm getting everything correct, and maybe the theology is totally bogus, but it works for me in terms of giving me purpose and mission in my life. And so when other people also find similar events saying, because this happened, I'm now on this mission, I think it's a beautiful thing, but I would never say such a terrible tragedy happened so that you could do that. I try to be very careful not to say it in that way.
It's very easy right now in this world of COVID and financial collapse and other, and then every little and big everyday tragedies for them to accumulate and for you to eventually kind of say, woe is me? Why are things so bad? What are some of the things how do you confront that? Not necessarily even, I don't know that you disagree with it or, but how do you confront it either for yourself or in a pastoral role?
When I first got sick, the fact that we had the internet was a lifeline. I mean, yes, we have phones and whatnot, but people would email me every day. People came to visit me. Yoni and Jessica had friends at Yale. I didn't have any friends at Yale, but they had friends at Yale, and they hooked me up with them. So that as this random person, I would go to the Hillel at Yale, and I already would know a couple of people, and I would have someone to sit with at davening and sit with at the Shabbat dinner. People called and came to visit, and people from far away came to visit. It made such a difference. We're all I've given this sermon a couple times in my congregation already, saying isolation and wearing masks and feeling vulnerable. I said, I did that when I was 21. I know exactly what that's like. Feeling like you could catch anything and it could be deadly. I'm not worried about it because I already lived it when I was in college. But on the other hand, what I lived through was an amazing community that helped take care of me. And now we all have to do it for one another. Somebody made the analogy that if you think about calling someone and don't call them, it's like wrapping up a birthday present and never delivering it. I try and call a couple congregants a day, and I constantly am telling people, call people every single day, even if you're just calling one person a day that's in your circle, and just check on them, just say hi. Especially people maybe are living alone or just a couple. They don't have a couple, if they don't have people that they're interacting with, a few people in their lives, it can just be so terribly lonely. And as with any kind of Bikur Cholim, we're all kind of cholera right now. We're all a little bit sick because we're all worried about it and we're all much more isolated. And it's really hard to be isolated. And having a little bit of contact. At a meeting with a B'nai Mitzvah family, it was the first time I'd seen them in months. And they actually came in just so we could kind of do a walkthrough of how we're going to work the bar mitzvah with separation and everything. It's like I didn't want them to leave. It's the first congregant I've seen in weeks. And it was so great to be, in a big room, even though we were 10 feet apart, just to be near them and to have an in-person conversation. We need to keep doing that because this is not going away. We're going to still have all these restrictions for months. So we need to keep those little interactions going until we can get back in each other's presence.
Ehud?
Yes.
Joe Brody here.
Hi, Joe.
Hi, Ehud. I just want to start by saying, you really, I'm still processing this extraordinary story that you tell, which is really remarkable for a young person like yourself. You have been through so much so soon in life, which I am sure makes you a wonderful pastor, because you really can understand what people twice and three times and four times your age are going through. You hinted at the very beginning that it started at age 16. what your friend, and you really had no clue what Bikur Cholim really meant, and how your ideas have, progressed as you yourself have been through illness and serious illness. So I just wonder, do you think, I'm just wondering, speculating about the future since I'm at least twice your age, if not more. Do you think some of your ideas may yet change when you hit 60 or when you hit 80, and that you will have yet new insights as you experience more of life?
I certainly hope so.
I agree.
I'm reminded of one of my favorite stories that I tell about seminary life. So I wasn't even born probably when this story took place, but it's a story that went around the seminary. I believe it was Rabbi Mordechai Kaplan was teaching a class in theology, and he gives a lecture, and apparently he was a very gruff man. I'd never met him, but apparently he could be pretty stern. And he comes into class and he says, "Gentlemen, who can explain?" Of course, it was only gentlemen at the time.
Right.
"Gentlemen, who can explain?" Everyone's scared and nobody wants to raise. So one shy student raises his hand and answers the question. And he tears into him. "How could you think such a stupid thing? How could you say, what mindless drivel?" And of course, everyone's sitting in silence. And the brave student said, "But Rabbi Kaplan, I was just repeating what you said yesterday." He said, "Oh yeah? Well, I've grown since then."
It's a great story. Can I just add to that story and amend it a little bit? Actually, that story was told in the first person by Arthur Hertzberg, a scholar in his own right. And I don't want to spend time, but just the story was that Arthur Hertzberg in senior year had to give his sermon in class the week before he gave it in the seminary synagogue. So when he got critiqued by Kaplan after he gave the sermon in class, he took very careful notes. And he gave the sermon in the synagogue according to Kaplan's notes. And that's when Kaplan came back and said to him, "It's dribble. How did you say such a thing?" And he said to Kaplan, "But Professor, these are your notes." And that's when Kaplan said, "But I've grown since last Thursday, Arthur." It's a great story, which we can all adapt for ourselves.
Thank you. Thank you for filling in the details. So certainly, I mean, I feel like we have to constantly grow and think and change.
Yeah.
Allison, do you want to ask something?
Yeah, thank you, Yoni. So thank you for sharing your story, and I feel like I'm definitely looking forward to read. Oh, Aaron's saying hello. Okay, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading the book. I feel like it was actually very surprising. Like when I saw the notification even about this event and the book, I was like, oh, that's the book that I was looking for. Like I didn't actively look for it, but I, like in my mind, I was like, oh, like, so thank you in advance. So how do you balance, or well, I'm not saying how you can share how you do, but how do you suggest people balance, or how do you think about balance of making meaning from something like unusual, hard, difficult, like illness, right? And making meaning and like finding that, like, what does this mean for your life? How do you process that, right? How do you balance that with that, like, you also just, you don't want it like to have meant nothing, but you also don't want to be defined by the worst thing that happened to you. Or one might not, I shouldn't say you don't want to. One might not want to be defined by like this, like maybe, something that's really bad in your life, like an illness, and, that feeling of just wanting to be done with it, right? in whatever way you can. So like, how do you balance those two, I would say, like, first, potentially competing emotional needs?
Mhm. So first of all, I guess for myself and as a rabbi pastor, I think about that text from Brachot, where one rabbi saying to the other one, like, you should learn a lesson from this, and the other one saying, it hurts. And he doesn't come back saying, yeah, but you're getting a lesson. He comes back with, how can I make it stop hurting? So our first goal with anyone is just, how can we make them stop hurting? How can we just be there for them to help the pain, alleviate the pain? So it's not, I never see it as my job to say to someone, this terrible thing happened, figure out why and what it means for you. And if you want to talk it out with me, I'm happy to do that. I never broach that as the subject for them. I simply try to pastor to them and help take the pain away. And if they come to me, like I came to Sandy, and say, I'm trying to figure out what all this means, then of course I'm ready to have the conversation with them. So that's how I try to approach it as a pastor. Personally, kind of, I think similar to what Yoni was getting at a little bit. I'm a rabbi. I believe in God, but I have my moments. I write about it in the book in terms of when I had the heart disease, because they didn't know initially what was wrong. And they were offering me different solutions depending on what it could be. And one of the solutions was a heart transplant. And I was, I bit my tongue because I wanted to like yell at the doctor saying, like, are you effing kidding me? Like, I beat cancer. And like, I just started my career as a rabbi and I'm trying to get going. And like, now you're going to tell me a heart transplant? Like, I know what the survival rates are for that. Really bad. This is not what's supposed to be happening. So some days I feel like that, where it's like, how can you be making all this meaning? Who knows? Maybe you're just a really sickly person. You just have really bad luck. But on other days, I recognize that the framework I've created, the meaning that I've made, the life that I've created because of this, is tremendously rewarding. And it works for me. It may not work for everybody, but it works for me. And if it works for me, I'm going to stick with it for as long as it works until as Joe mentioned, until I need something different, until I need a different framework that doesn't work anymore. It's unfair in the sense like I've had different rabbinical students as interns, and they say things like, how do you deal with the stress of the rabbinate? I say, my answer is going to be totally unfair. I say, I think about, is this worse than the day you were in the hospital? Is this worse than, surgery day? And I go, no. So it's a pretty good day. So that's not fair, because if you haven't had a surgery day, you can't compare it to that. But it's given me tremendous perspective. On some level, it makes people really mad because I'm really calm all the time, even in difficult situations. And sometimes congregants say, like, we want to see more emotion from you, Rabbi. I'm like, I get emotional at really emotional things, but I like the everyday trials and travails. I don't sweat it, because I've been through a lot worse. And that works for me. And that helps me stay calm and manage the small swells. The big swells, they're still hard. I had to do a funeral for a teenager a couple of years ago, and that was really hard. And it gave me all kind of PTSD and flashbacks and things like that. But for the most part, it works for me.
I think that's a good place to end. I'm sensitive to the time. Thank you so much, Ehud, for coming back to CSAR. I know that you were, it was a way more fun plan when you had reserved, our basement to sleep over and come really visit in person.
Yeah.
But we hope you'll do that again soon. And thank you for sharing words of Torah and words of your personal wisdom. And
Thank you.
do buy the book. I put your email in the chat so people can email you to order it. It's also available on Amazon, but you can order it right from Ehud.
If you order it right from me, I'll sign it. So, and I'm not sure this is going to be any cheaper than Amazon. So I'm selling it for $18. I think Amazon might be a little bit cheaper. I don't know how they're undercutting me, but But you'll get a signed copy if you order from me. So if you just send me an email with your name and address, I'll mail you a copy and you can mail me a check back.